Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books number 79. The first book today is Stolen Lives 20 Years in a Desert Jail by Malika Oukfir and Michelle Fitoussi, 1999. Wow, what a book. The author is the daughter of General Oukfir, the one-time top aide of the King of Morocco. That's in Northwest Africa. In 1972, General Oukfir led an unsuccessful coup d'etat against the king. In other words, he tried to take power. He was arrested and executed. Then his wife and 6 children were arrested and spent 20 years in prison in terrible conditions. Somehow they survived and were released. Very inspiring book, an incredible book. Now here's a quote from the book. Am I not more profound, carrying the burden of those 20 years when I, quote, wasn't alive, than all those who rushed around in vain during that time? In prison, my inner life was 1,000 times richer than that of others, and my thinking 1,000 times more intense. I was a lot more aware than people who are free. I learned to reflect on the meaning of life and death. Wow, what a statement. Malika, the author, was adopted by the king when she was very young. Her father tried to kill the king, was killed by him, and Malika was imprisoned by her adoptive father. Wow. Today she's happily married and a mother living in Paris, France. God bless her. Yeah, this what she describes, she was very young. Yeah, she was a girl when her whole family was arrested, and that was her growing up. She grew up without her father. Her father was gone. He had died and was considered an enemy of the king. And then they were considered suspect. The wife, the widow, and children. So they were imprisoned, and this was very painful. She had all this pain in her life. Her father being killed, and then her adoptive father. Apparently, she was adopted by the king, and then returned to her family at some point when she thought, I want to be with my real family. And these conditions that they went through were really, really something. They were cold. They were they were very isolated. They were in this prison, this desert prison, just them and their jailers. There was no prison population. And it was in this remote area, so it was cold, and they didn't get to, their food wasn't very good, and they were often hungry. And so they're pretty lonely, but they had each other, and like she says in this quote, it was really intense. So when they finally got out of prison, they actually tried to escape at one point and were captured and brought back, and then eventually her family was released. I guess the king his conscience finally bothered him, and he thought, well, they weren't a threat to her. But the thing that was sad is when they escaped the one time, they went to try to get, they were going to different people that they knew and who wanted nothing to do with them because they were all scared if they helped them, that they would get arrested. So eventually they were all released, and they left. She left. She finally decided to leave Morocco. She thought, well, I'm never going to be able to have a good life here. I'll always, she could get arrested again. And so this is a story of triumph. This woman, was successful. She was not destroyed by this experience. In fact, as she says in that quote, she benefited. And when she got out, she saw people living very trivial lives on the outside. Sort of rushing around and getting upset over small things. So she benefited from it, as she said, and it's really an amazing story. It shows that no matter what happens, we can benefit from hardships. We can grow stronger, and we can grow in wisdom, which she did. So it's a tremendous book. I believe she's still alive, and yeah, what a story! Amazing by Malika Oukfir, this Moroccan. Now she's a Moroccan French woman. The next book is Pete Rose, An American Dilemma by Kostya Kennedy, 2014. Wow, what a book. This is a baseball book. It's extremely well written and heartbreaking. Pete Rose, Major League Baseball's all-time hit king, had 4,000 plus hits. He was driven, determined, diligent, selfish, arrogant, kind, funny, crazy, boorish, a womanizer, a compulsive gambler, and dishonest. A good guy and a bad guy. His son Pete Rose Jr. played minor league baseball for 21 years, took terrible abuse from fans, and sees good in his father. The father-son stuff is heartbreaking in this book. Baseball was the only place for Petey, that's Pete Rose Jr., to relate to his father. And the thing that I got out of the book was that Pete Rose Jr. is a very good guy, a good husband, a good father, still hoping to be a Major League Baseball manager. That's the thing I thought was very interesting and really something, that this, his father had been, one of the greatest baseball players of all time and was banned from baseball. Pete Rose Jr. Played briefly in the majors. And but very, very little. But then, he had this long minor league career where he was really determined, trying to, to achieve and kind of match what his father had done. Obviously, he never did, but still, you got to give the guy credit. 21 years playing minor league baseball, and his father was kind of a troubled guy, and in a sense, ruined by wealth and fame. But not completely bad. There's good and bad in everyone. And Pete Rose, a lot of people were anti-Pete Rose. Oh, he's this bad guy. And to some extent, he was a bad guy, but he was also a good guy. So I thought that it was a very honest book, and look at Pete Rose and his son. Very interesting. I really enjoyed this book. The next book is America's Prophet, Moses and the American Story by Bruce Feiler, 2009. This is a wonderful book. The author of the book argues that Moses, from the Old Testament of the Bible, is the real founding father of the USA. Moses led the enslaved Jewish people from slavery in Egypt to freedom in Israel. This is maybe 1000 BC. The Puritans, the Puritans, these were English people in England who had their own religion. The founding fathers of the United States, guys like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and so forth, and African American slaves, and 1950s era African Americans were all inspired by Moses, all inspired by him. George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Martin Luther King were all considered American Moseses. They were all like Moses, leading people. In other words, in the case of Washington, leading Europeans who were enslaved in Europe to freedom in America. Obviously, Abraham Lincoln, who helped end slavery by prosecuting the Civil War. So he was another Moses. And then Martin Luther King, who fought for equal rights for African Americans in the 1950s and 1960s. This is a very interesting book. And then you have European Jews who are attracted to America, in part because Moses was so highly respected in the United States. Of course, Moses is a tremendous hero for Jewish people. American Jewish people and African Americans were bonded by Moses. They both, were inspired by Moses, this great leader from the Old Testament. The Ohio River was like the Jordan River, near the land of freedom. In other words, when the Jewish people they crossed the Jordan River to enter Israel, their promised land, 3,000 years ago. So that was like a land of a very important river. And then the Ohio River, which separated Kentucky from Ohio. Kentucky was a slave state, and Ohio a free state. So when the African American slaves who were escaping during slavery days from the South and traveling north, their goal was the Ohio River, and when they crossed the Ohio River, they were in Ohio, a free state. Of course, the slave catchers could still get them, but anyway, so for them, that was kind of like the Jordan River. This is really an amazing book. It shows how Moses, this great leader from the Old Testament of the Bible, inspired so many Americans, going back to the very beginning when the Puritans left England because they were being persecuted for religion, coming to America, and then other generations since then have been inspired by Moses. So this is I really enjoyed this book. The next book is The Kingdom, Arabia, and the House of Saud by Robert Lacey, 1981. Wow, what a tremendous book. It's the history of Saudi Arabia. Wow, interesting. Ibn Saud, the founder and first king of Saudi Arabia. His sons, who also became kings, Saud, who was a spendthrift, Faisal, who was assassinated, Khalid, and Fahad sharing power. The transformation of a very poor desert people, materially poor, into a very materially wealthy people through petroleum wealth, the raw material or for gasoline. Islam, the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, are in Saudi Arabia. Of course, they were limited by British power in Iraq and the Gulf states, very anti-Israel, along with basically all the other Muslim countries. 4,000 member royal Saud family. The founding father of Saudi Arabia, Ibn Saud. He had in Islam, they are in Muslim culture. Their men are allowed to have more than one wife, and the more money you have, the more wives you can support. So he had, I believe, quite a few wives, and then a lot of his sons as well. So now you have 4,000 descendants of Ibn Saud, who are all members of the royal family. And of course, that they have no democracy in Saudi Arabia. It's basically the country is ruled by the Saud family. And so other parts, he talks about the peace of the desert at the night. Folks would drive out of town. Instead of going to the beach, they would go to the desert to enjoy the peace of the desert. Conflict with Egypt and Nasser, who was this leader of Egypt. Complicated relations with the United States, because the U.S. was the very strong supporter of Israel, and of course the U.S. was the major purchaser of petroleum. The challenge of massive instant wealth. Yeah, this is really something. Saudi Arabia, they were a very poor country. You can't. How can you make much money on the desert? The desert, it's not fertile. You can't grow, but you can't grow crops and so forth or create wealth. But then all of a sudden they got all this money, and this has made them a very wealthy people. And it has given them a sense that they are right, that their way of living, that the whole world should be Muslim, and their ideas of Islam should be adopted worldwide. And they're promoting their ideas around the world, promoting Islam. And there's this cultural conflict with the West because they don't believe in freedom of religion, and they're anti-Israel, and actually, they're not democratic. There's no democracy in Saudi Arabia, and the belief in Sharia law that the law that people should be governed by Muslim law. So this is a very interesting book about Saudi Arabia, and certainly a very important country because of they have a lot of money, so they have wealth, and that gives them power, and they have the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. To which the Muslims around the world make Hajj, or the holy pilgrimage to Mecca. Very interesting book. Really enjoyed it. The next book is All Standing: The Remarkable Story of the Jeanie Johnston, the legendary Irish famine ship, by Catherine Miles, 2013. I enjoyed this book. It's the story of the Irish potato famine around 1850, and one ship that safely brought many Irish people to the United States and Canada with no one dying during the trips. Terrible suffering, hunger, disease, death, heartbreak, greed, and heroism. Very interesting book. In Ireland they had the so-called potato famine, where potatoes were the staple food for the Irish people. And then there was this sickness in the potato plants, and so the potatoes they became rotten, and the people couldn't eat them, and this led to famine. And I believe more than 1 million Irish people starved to death, and something like that, and that led to large numbers of Irish people leaving Ireland, and we have today in the U.S. a huge population that's Irish descendants of the people who left, because no one wants starvation is something no one wants to go through, because we need to stay alive, and what a horrible way to die through starvation. So this is a book about this ship that saved these people, brought them to Canada and the U.S. where they have been very successful and very important contributors to the United States and Canada. Very interesting book. Really enjoyed it. The next book is Let's Have Another by Dan Coughlin, 2015. Well, Dan Coughlin was a Cleveland sports writer, and these are stories from his experiences covering the Cleveland professional sports teams. Talked about Ted Stepien, the one-time pretty bad, really terrible owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, Cleveland Municipal Stadium, where the Cleveland Indians and Cleveland Browns both played years ago, back in from the 30s. Well, for the Indians from the 30s to the 90s, and the Browns in the 40s to the 90s. Stadium Mustard, which was very popular on hot dogs. Don King was the local boxing promoter. Howard Cosell, of course, who came to Cleveland for Monday Night Football. Albert Bell played for the Indians. Tony Horton, Cleveland Indian player who had a mental breakdown. Otto Graham, Cleveland Browns quarterback, driving west on Wolf Road in Bay Village after a Browns game, bringing some kids home who are hanging out by the locker room, who also lived in Bay Village. The good old days. I wrote a letter to Dan Coughlin based on my reaction to this book. We actually had a correspondence. I believe I got 3 letters back from him before he thought, well, that's enough of that guy. Anyway, he's a good guy, Dan Coughlin. I met him at the there was a Rocky River book festival or book fair, and he was there. And I wrote him a letter. I said I saw you there. I was too shy, and he said, well, next time you see me, come up to me and introduce yourself. So I think I'll do that. He lives here in Rocky River. I brought a Cleveland City of Champions t-shirt to his home as a gift, and he wrote me a nice thank you letter. Talks about how the NFL Players Association got started in Rocky River at the home of Dante LaValle, which is, so it's really enjoyed this book. The next book is Lawrence in Arabia by Scott Anderson, 2013. This book has 505 pages. I really enjoyed it. Of course, there's the famous movie Lawrence of Arabia, so it's kind of a takeoff on that. In the title, "in" is underlined. Unfortunately, there are missing pages 49 to 114, so in case I ever decide to read those 65 missing pages, I can do that. So this is a book about Arabia during World War I, the British fighting the Turks, who were on the opposing side of the war. Arabs fighting Turks for independence, because Arabia was part of the Ottoman Empire. Lawrence, who was an Englishman among Arabs, and his job was to organize Arabs fighting Turks because they had a common enemy. His main ally, Faisal, who was later king of Syria and king of Iraq. Sykes-Picot. The French that was this Sykes-Picot treaty between England, Great Britain, and France, in which the French took Syria and Lebanon, parts of the Ottoman Empire, which was being dismantled, and the British took Iraq and Palestine. The Balfour Agreement, the British support for Jewish immigration to Palestine, which of course led to the modern Israel, the country for Jewish people. Faisal's brother becoming king of Jordan. Lebanon and Palestine separated from Syria. Arabs wanting Iraq and Syria to be part of an independent Arab state. Lawrence, scarred by the horrors of the Arab-Turk War. The Desert Warrior immortalized by the movie. So this is really interesting. Wonderful history. Lawrence of Arabia, that's a famous movie, and this guy. And actually after that, he'd been through so much, seen so much death, and I believe he was tortured, captured at one point. And he was a part of, it's a First World War movie, and in the area of Arabia, and the Arabs fighting for independence against the Turks, and the British being allies with them, having a common enemy. And actually, this also included when General Edmund Allenby of the British, when they took Jerusalem, the holy city of Jewish people, Christians, and Muslims, took it from the Turks. Yeah, and then there's the street in San Juan, Metro Manila, Philippines, Allenby Street, named after General Edmund Allenby, and it's also an inclined plane because it slants downward. It's a simple physics concept, and there's the Turkish school in Manila, and not too far away, which they might not be happy about the name of that street, Allenby Street. So this is a very wonderful history of the Middle East, back during the First World War and when the Ottoman Empire was broken up and these new countries were created, which date to that time, created by the French and the British. Iraq was a new country that was created, Jordan, Syria, and so forth. So wonderful history, very interesting. Really enjoyed it. Highly recommended. The next book is The Bloody White Baron, The Extraordinary Story of the Russian Nobleman Who Became the Last Khan of Mongolia by James Palmer, 2009. This is a very interesting book. It's the story of the German Estonian in Old Russia, guy named Baron Roman Ungern Sternberg, who became a military political leader in Mongolia in the 1920s, fighting Bolsheviks and Russian communists. He was able to keep Mongolia independent of China, saving it from hordes of Chinese would-be immigrants. The author met a woman today who said her family worshipped him as a god. Ungern believed that Jewish people started communism 3,000 years ago in Babylon. This guy was actually a very bad guy. He was a violent, cruel man. So this book gets into the Russian Civil War, when Russia became a communist country, and then there were anti-communist forces that tried to stop that from happening, who were defeated. You got the Mongols, of course, who were famous under the time of Genghis Khan when they had their empire 900 years ago. The Chinese and Russians, Mongolia is between Russia and China. It was a big mess. Buddhism, relations with Tibet, the Japanese, and Manchuria. The Japanese, of course, invasion of China. So this guy, he was a German Estonian who became, as the title said, the last Khan. The Khan, Khan. Khan is another name for king, I believe. So he was like the king of Mongolia, and he was from what's now Estonia, but he had a German background. And it kind of shows the power of, he was a strong-willed guy, and there was, we live at different times in history, there's sort of chaos, and he came there and he had a strong will, and he inspired respect, or fear and respect, and was able to keep power for a period of time before he was defeated, not for many years. But anyway, very interesting book. It's such an international book. All these different countries, Russia, China, Mongolia, and then this German guy who was from Estonia in Russia. So very interesting book. Wow, really something. History is full of amazing stories. This is one of them. The next book is Power, Faith, and Fantasy, America in the Middle East, 1776 to the Present, by Michael B. Oren, 2007. This is a really good book. It's 604 pages, and it goes back to as the title says, the relationship between the United States and the Middle East, starting with 1776, the independence of the U.S., trouble with North African Barbary pirates attacking American commercial ships. Yeah, this was an ongoing issue with European countries, because North Africa, the North African coast is on the Mediterranean Sea, and across the Mediterranean is Europe, the countries of Spain, France, Italy, and so forth. So these European countries had long been dealing with these North African pirates, and then when the U.S. became independent, we no longer had British protection from these pirates. And this is where they were capturing American ships, and the crew were enslaved by these North African countries, and they demanded tribute. They said, well, if you want to sail the Mediterranean, you're going to have to pay us money for free passage. That was their belief. And American missionaries from the early 1800s, this is very interesting, building schools and hospitals, doing tremendous good in the Middle East. They came in, their whole focus was to spread Christianity, and but of course Muslim peoples are not very open. They really don't have religious freedom. So even if they wanted to become Christian, it's very hard for them to do so. They really risk, they risk their lives under under Sharia law. If you're a Muslim and leave Islam and become a different religion, then the punishment is death. So that nobody wants to die. So this is really tough. But you have to give a lot of credit to these American missionaries because they were coming. They knew that the people, it was very hard for them to convert to Christianity, but they thought, okay, we'll be patient. And what we'll do is we'll help them. And they built schools and hospitals, which really was very helpful. So it was the beginning of widespread education in the Middle East, these American missionaries bringing schools and, modern medicine, hospitals as well. So they did an awful lot of good. And it never led to large numbers of Muslim peoples or Middle East people becoming Christian. And actually, there was a local Christian community. There were there was actually in the Middle East a long time Christians going back to the early days of Christianity, and they already were Christian, and they were not going to change their brand of Christianity to adopt American Protestant version of Christianity. Now, the Armenian genocide talks about that. This was, in a way, it was affected or instigated by American missionaries who kind of inspired Armenians who were Christian. They were a Christian people, and so they were kind of inspired to want better treatment, and that led them into conflict with the Turks, who ended up massacring, I believe, close to 1 million. And this became a real tragic thing, a horrendous thing. American support for Israel and the high cost of Arab anger, friendship with Saudi Arabia, plenty of challenges with the Middle East, Islamic jihad. So this is, in the modern world because of petroleum wealth. The Muslim countries were all generally, in the 1800s and their 1900s, they were all pretty poor and weak. Their economies were not developing. Kind of a depressed people, you could say. But in the 20th century, starting in the 1930s and 40s, all this wealth flowed into not only Saudi Arabia but Kuwait and Qatar and Bahrain and so forth, and these small Arab oil states. And now we're having problems with Muslim countries who are spreading Islamic jihad, war on the West, and terrorism and so forth. So it's a very interesting book, and I really had a lot of respect for the good the American missionaries did. They realized now these people are not going to become Christian, but let's do what good we can. And I think this is important in life. So they were very patient and had a long-term goal and did a lot of good. Really enjoyed this book. The next book is The 12 Caesars by Michael Grant, 1975. Wonderful book. It's about the Roman Empire. So this is going back 2,000 years in Europe. Basically, it's centered on what's now Italy, but much more than that. In what's now France and Spain and England. Not really Germany, but in parts into the Balkan Peninsula and North Africa. Anyway, this book is about 12 Caesars, or basically kings of the Roman Empire, starting with Julius, the most famous, Julius Caesar, and then Augustus Caesar, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. Julius established, it appears we're out of time. We're going to have to continue the story of the Caesars, the 12 Caesars, next time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you find a good history book to read. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.